Frank Pearson stood at the large window of the Earth Embassy, looking out at the vast expanse of stars. 3 years had passed since humans had joined the Galactic Council as observers. 3 long years of smiling through insults and nodding at dismissals. "Ambassador, the council session begins in 20 minutes, said Olivia Grant, walking into the room with a datapad in hand. Her white lab coat marked her as the science liaison, a position that should have earned her respect among the technology-focused council races. Frank turned from the window, straightening his blue diplomatic uniform. "Thank you, Olivia. Any new developments I should know about?" "The Valdorians have requested extra time today. They claim it's about mining rights in the Outer Rim, but my sources suggest otherwise." Frank sighed. The Valdorians, tall, blue-skinned beings with 4 arms, had been the most openly hostile toward humans since first contact. Their empire spanned 12 star systems, making Earth's single solar system seem tiny in comparison. "Of course they have," Frank said, his voice calm despite his frustration. "Let's maintain protocol as usual, courtesy above all." Commander Sean Murphy entered, his military uniform crisp and his expression serious. "Sir, I finished the security assessment for today's meeting. Council guards have once again denied our request to bring our own security team." "Another violation of Section 12 of the Observer Status Agreement," Frank noted, keeping his voice even. "Add it to the list, Commander." The list had grown quite long. Denied speaking opportunities, blocked trade proposals, ignored scientific contributions, all carefully documented by Frank's team. The 3 humans walked through the gleaming corridors of the council station, a massive structure floating at the crossroads of several major trade routes. Other species moved aside as they passed, some with obvious disgust, others with mere indifference. Ambassador Pearson called a raspy voice. A Zentari diplomat approached, his gray skin wrinkled around multifaceted eyes. "I trust you are prepared to simply observe today. The matters at hand are quite beyond human understanding." Frank smiled politely. "High Counselor Vextrol, always a pleasure. We look forward to learning from the Council's wisdom." The Zentari made a sound between a snort and a hiss before moving on. "How do you do that?" Sean whispered once the alien was out of earshot. "Do what?" "Remain so calm when they treat us like children." Frank's smile never wavered. "Protocol courtesy, Commander. The directive from Earth is clear. We represent all of humanity. We cannot afford to show anger or offense, no matter the provocation." They arrived at the enormous council chamber where representatives from 27 advanced civilizations gathered in a tiered semicircle. Humans, as mere observers, were seated at the very back, far from the speaking platform. As they took their seats, several council members glanced their way with expressions ranging from amusement to contempt. "The council acknowledges the presence of the Earth observers," announced the Zentari chair, "the bare minimum of protocol recognition." Frank nodded in acknowledgement while Olivia prepared her datapad to record the proceedings. The session began with the usual formalities. Species that had been spacefaring for thousands of years discussed matters as if humans weren't present. Occasionally, Frank would raise the small blue flag that requested speaking permission, and each time it was ignored. "The chair recognizes the Valdorian Empire," Vextrol announced. A Valdorian representative rose, all 4 arms held ceremonially wide. "The Empire wishes to propose a new initiative regarding the underdeveloped Sol system." Frank felt a chill run down his spine. The Sol system, Earth's home. Specifically, the Valdorian continued, "We propose establishing a protective oversight colony on the 4th planet, Mars, as the humans call it." Beside Frank, Sean stiffened. Olivia's fingers froze above her datapad. Frank raised his blue flag higher, but Vextrol's gaze passed over him as if he were invisible. "The motion will be considered," the chair announced. "We shall hear arguments tomorrow." As the session ended, Frank maintained his diplomatic smile, but something had changed in his eyes. The Valdorians weren't just insulting humans now. They were threatening to take part of humanity's home system. For the first time in 3 years, Frank wondered if protocol courtesy had reached its limit. The next day, Frank arrived at the council chamber early. He had spent most of the night preparing arguments against the Valdorian proposal. Olivia and Scene sat beside him, both looking as tired as he felt. "Remember, we follow protocol courtesy no matter what," Frank whispered. "We cannot give them any reason to dismiss us as primitive or aggressive." The chamber filled quickly. Many species seemed more interested than usual, glancing at the human delegation with newfound curiosity. The Valdorians entered last, their blue skin shimmering under the chamber lights, all 4 arms moving in graceful patterns that suggested confidence. High Counselor Vextrol called the session to order. "We continue from yesterday's proceedings. The Valdorian Empire has proposed establishing a protective oversight colony on the human planet Mars. The Valdorian representative may now present their case." The lead Valdorian, Ambassador Courteous, moved to the central platform. "Esteemed council members, our proposal comes from deep concern for galactic stability. Human development has shown troubling patterns. Their history is filled with war. Their technology advances too quickly without proper ethical frameworks. Our oversight colony would ensure they develop along safer paths." Frank raised his blue flag immediately. Vextrol pretended not to see it. "Furthermore," Courteous continued, "humans have barely used their 4th planet. It sits empty while other species face overcrowding. We would bring proper management to this wasted resource." Several council members nodded in agreement. Frank raised his flag higher. "The Valdorian Empire will begin this protective mission within 30 days, Courteous announced. "We have already prepared our first colony ships. This is not simply a proposal. It is a notification of our intentions, in keeping with council guidelines for developing systems." The chamber buzzed with conversation. Frank stood up, still holding his flag. "The human wishes to speak," said a voice Frank didn't expect. It belonged to Admiral Jorax of the Arcturian Federation, a species that had remained neutral toward humans. Vextrol couldn't ignore the Arcturian's recognition. "The chair recognizes the Earth Observer. You may approach the speaking platform." Frank walked forward, feeling the eyes of every species on him. He placed his datapad on the podium and took a deep breath. "Esteemed council members, the Valdorian proposal violates 17 different sections of the Galactic Charter, most notably the sovereignty rights of developing systems. Mars is part of humanity's home system and is already being prepared for human settlement." Courteous interrupted. "The human exaggerates. Their Mars efforts are primitive at best. They have sent only robots and a few temporary visitors." "If I may continue," Frank said, his voice still calm despite the interruption. "Earth has established permanent research bases on Mars and has begun the terraforming process. We have legal claim under point of procedure," called out another Valdorian. "Observer species cannot cite charter law against full council members." Vextrol nodded. "The point is valid. Ambassador Pearson, please restrict your comments to matters within observer purview." Frank kept his face neutral despite the unfair limitation. "Very well. I simply ask the Council to consider that Earth does not consent to any colony on Mars or any planet in our system. Consent is not required for protective oversight," Courteous said dismissively. "That is why it is called oversight and not partnership." Laughter rippled through the chamber. Frank gripped the edges of the podium, but his expression remained polite. "I request formal arbitration under Section 5 of the Observer Status Agreement," Frank said. "Denied," Vextrol replied without hesitation. "The matter will proceed to preliminary vote." "Without human testimony?" Frank asked, his courteous tone finally showing a hint of strain. "The observers have been heard," Vextrol declared. "The Council will now vote on whether to recognize the Valdorian protective action." Frank returned to his seat. Scene leaned close to him. "Sir, this is beyond diplomatic insult. This is an invasion plan with Council approval." "I know," Frank replied quietly. "Contact Earth immediately. Tell them that protocol courtesy may have reached its limits. As the voting began, Frank watched the Valdorians exchange smug glances. For the first time in his diplomatic career, he wondered what would happen if humanity stopped being so polite. Frank paced the secure meeting room at the Earth Embassy. The preliminary vote had gone as expected. 22 council members had supported the Valdorian proposal, with only 3 opposing and 2 abstaining. The plan to colonize Mars would now move to final approval in 3 days. "This goes beyond unfair," Olivia said, looking up from her data screens. "They're treating our entire solar system like unclaimed territory." Seam stood by the communication array, his face grim. "Earth Command is on standby. They're waiting for your assessment, Ambassador." Frank stopped pacing and looked at his team. "For 3 years, we followed protocol courtesy to the letter. We've smiled through insults, accepted unfair rulings, and played the role of the grateful newcomers just to gain a foothold in galactic politics." "And what has it gotten us?" Olivia asked. "They still treat us like children. Or pets," said Diane Wells as she entered the room. As the team's communications specialist, she had been monitoring council transmissions. Her expression suggested she had discovered something important. "What did you find?" Frank asked. Diane placed a data crystal on the central table. A holographic display appeared, showing ship movements near the edge of the solar system. "The Valdorians aren't waiting for final approval. They've already dispatched their first wave of colony ships. They'll reach Mars in less than a week." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "This was never about a vote," Sean said quietly. "They were going to take Mars regardless of the Council's decision." Frank nodded. "Get me a direct line to President Crawford. This situation has escalated beyond diplomatic solutions." Minutes later, the secure screen lit up with the image of President Allison Crawford. Her expression was serious as Frank explained the situation. "The evidence is clear, Madam President," Frank concluded. "The Valdorians intend to establish their colony with or without Council approval, and the Council itself has shown it will not protect our sovereign rights." President Crawford listened without interruption. When Frank finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. "Ambassador Pearson, for 3 years you and your team have represented humanity with exceptional restraint and dignity. You've followed protocol courtesy, even when it must have been difficult." "Yes, Madam President. I believe it's time for a change in approach." President Crawford's voice was calm but firm. "Effective immediately, I am authorizing the suspension of protocol courtesy. Code designation. Enough is enough." Frank felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "Understood, Madam President." "Ambassador, to be absolutely clear, this is not authorization for hostilities. This is permission to show the Council who we really are and what we're truly capable of. The mask comes off, but we remain committed to peaceful solutions if possible." "Yes, Madam President." After the call ended, Frank turned to his team. "Well, you heard the President. Protocol courtesy has been suspended." Sean almost smiled. "What's our next move, sir?" "Diane, I need everything you've gathered on the Valdorians, especially their communications about their real intentions for Mars. Olivia, prepare a complete technical package on our actual technological capabilities. Sean, contact our security teams. Tomorrow will be different." As his team dispersed to their tasks, Frank returned to the window overlooking the vast Council station. In other parts of the station, various alien representatives were likely celebrating their victory over the naive humans or placing bets on how quickly Earth would surrender Mars to the Valdorians. Little did they know that tomorrow, they would meet the real humanity for the first time. The polite, deferential humans who had patiently endured 3 years of disrespect were about to show the galaxy what happened when humanity's courteous mode switched off. Frank allowed himself a small, genuine smile. Tomorrow would indeed be interesting. The next morning, Frank dressed in his diplomatic uniform as usual. However, something was different. He did not practice his courteous smile in the mirror. He did not rehearse polite phrases and diplomatic responses. Today, he would simply be Frank Pearson, representing Earth as himself. Scene and Olivia met him in the embassy hallway. They too seemed different, standing straighter, eyes more focused. The council session begins in 30 minutes, Scene said. The Valdorian motion for Mars is third on the agenda. Frank nodded. And our preparations? All ready, Olivia confirmed. Diane has the data package prepared to broadcast to all council screens simultaneously. We can activate it on your signal. Good. Frank began walking toward the council chamber. Remember, we're not looking for a fight. We're simply done pretending to be less than we are. The council chamber was more crowded than usual. Word had spread about the Mars colonization plan, and many wanted to witness the humans' reaction. Some species likely came to enjoy watching Earth's representatives squirm and ultimately accept their fate. Frank took his seat in the observer section. He noticed several council members glancing his way, perhaps expecting to see despair or resignation. Instead, they saw only calm determination. The session began with routine matters. Frank paid little attention until Vextrol announced, "We now move to the Valdorian proposal regarding protective oversight of the Sol system planet designated Mars." Ambassador Kreltox took the central platform. "Esteemed Council, we have prepared a detailed timeline for our Mars operation. The first phase will begin with the arrival of our advanced ships, which are already en route." Frank stood up without raising his blue flag. "Observer, you have not been recognized," Vextrol said sharply. "Resume your seat." Frank ignored him and walked calmly toward the central platform. "Security, remove the human," Vextrol ordered. The Council security forces, large reptilian beings, moved toward Frank. Scene stepped into their path. "I wouldn't," Scene said quietly. The security forces hesitated, confused by this new assertive human behavior. Frank reached the platform where Kreltox stood. The Valdorian, nearly 2 feet taller than Frank, looked down with four-eyed contempt. "You are out of order, human," Kreltox said. "No," Frank replied, his voice carrying throughout the chamber without raising it. "It is this council that is out of order." A shocked murmur spread through the chamber. No observer species had ever spoken this way. "For 3 years," Frank continued, "humanity has shown nothing but courtesy and respect to this council. We have followed every rule, accepted every slight, and maintained diplomatic protocol even when it was clear we were being treated unfairly." "This is not proper procedure," Vextrol began. "I am speaking," Frank said, his tone making it clear he would not be interrupted. To everyone's surprise, Vextrol fell silent. "We came to this council hoping to join a community of civilizations built on mutual respect and cooperation. Instead, we found a system where power alone dictates rights, where less advanced species are treated as resources to be exploited rather than equals to be welcomed." Frank turned to face the entire council. "The Valdorian plan to colonize Mars is not about protection or oversight. It is theft, plain and simple." "How dare you?" Kreltox sputtered. "Olivia, show them," Frank said calmly. Throughout the chamber, every screen changed to show internal Valdorian communications, messages discussing the rich mineral deposits on Mars, plans for extraction operations, and calculations of profit margins. None mentioned protection or oversight of humans. These messages were sent between Valdorian officials over the past month, Frank explained. Their interest is not in humanity's welfare, but in Mars' resources. The chamber erupted in chaos. Kreltox backed away from Frank, all 4 hands gesturing frantically. "This is only the beginning," Frank said, his voice somehow cutting through the noise. "Humanity has been patient. That patience has now run out." As the council chamber descended into disorder, Vextrol struck his ceremonial staff against the floor 3 times. The loud sound gradually brought the room back to order. "This is an outrage," Kreltox hissed. "The humans have clearly falsified these communications." Frank remained calm. "Diane, please show the authentication codes." The screens changed to display complex verification data. Olivia stepped forward. These messages carry quantum authentication markers specific to Valdorian diplomatic channels, she explained. They cannot be faked. Every species on this council knows this. Several council members began to whisper among themselves. The Valdorian evidence was damning. Furthermore, Frank continued, the Valdorian interest in Mars is not unique. We have evidence of similar plans from other council members. The screens changed again, now showing communications from 5 other species discussing Earth's resources, military capabilities, and potential colonization strategies. For 3 years, while we played the role of grateful observers, humanity has been monitoring your communications, not because we wanted to spy, but because we needed to protect ourselves. A Zentari representative stood up. This is illegal surveillance. Observer species are forbidden from intelligence gathering. And yet, Frank replied, full council members are permitted to discuss the colonization of observer worlds without their knowledge. Is that fair? No one answered. The double standard was too obvious. Humanity came here in good faith, Frank said. We showed you respect. We followed your rules. We endured your contempt. And all the while, many of you were planning to carve up our solar system like a prize. Frank walked around the central platform, making eye contact with representatives from each major species. Did you think we were naive? Did you believe we wouldn't take precautions? Humanity has survived thousands of years of our own conflicts. We've learned to hope for peace while preparing for betrayal. Diane activated another data package. The screens now showed evidence of council members mocking humans in private, calling them primitives and easy targets. This is how you spoke about us behind closed doors, Frank said. While we were extending friendship, you were planning exploitation. The Arcturian Admiral Jorak stood. Unlike the others, he didn't seem angry or defensive. Ambassador Pearson speaks truth that needed saying, the Arcturian declared. I have watched this council treat humans unfairly since their arrival. Perhaps it is time for honesty. A few other representatives nodded in agreement, but most looked outraged or embarrassed. Vextroll finally found his voice again. These accusations, while troubling if true, do not change council procedure. The Valdorian motion. The Valdorian motion is based on lies, Frank interrupted. And we have not finished presenting our evidence. Olivia activated the next set of data. The screen showed a 3-dimensional map of the solar system with a flashing red dot near the orbit of Neptune. This, Frank explained, is the current position of the Valdorian fleet heading toward Mars. They launched before even bringing their proposal to the Council. They never intended to wait for approval. Krultox backed away from the platform. This is within our rights as a superior civilization. Humans cannot be trusted with the resources of Mars. And that, Frank said, his voice hardening for the first time, is where you are profoundly mistaken. Diane, show them the final data package. The screens changed one last time. Now they displayed a different map of the solar system. This one showing dozens of previously undetected human defense platforms surrounding each planet, with particularly heavy concentrations around Mars. As we speak, Frank said, Earth Defense Command has activated our outer system protection grid. The Valdorian fleet has been immobilized by targeted EMP weapons. No ships were damaged, no lives were lost, but they will not move another inch toward Mars. The council chamber fell completely silent as the implications became clear. Humanity was not as defenseless as everyone had believed. Vextroll's voice trembled slightly as he spoke. Ambassador Pearson, are you claiming that humanity has deployed a military defense system throughout your solar system without informing the Council? Yes, Frank said simply. Just as the Valdorians deployed their fleet without informing the Council. Sean stepped forward to stand beside Frank. While Ambassador Pearson has represented Earth politically, I have overseen our security preparations. Humanity has never been as vulnerable as we appeared to be. The screens changed again, now showing images of sleek, nearly invisible satellites and defense platforms. Our stealth technology, Sean explained, is generations ahead of detection systems used by council races. We developed it during our own internal conflicts, long before we met any of you. Krelltox, now visibly nervous, moved away from the platform. This is a violation of council regulations. Observer species are forbidden from deploying advanced weapons. Actually, Olivia said, stepping forward with a datapad. Section 47, Paragraph 3 of the Observer Status Agreement states that observer species may maintain reasonable defensive measures within their home systems. It doesn't specify what constitutes reasonable. You've been deliberately misleading the Council about your technological capabilities, accused a representative from the Morrigan Collective, a species of insectoid beings. No, Frank replied. We never lied about our capabilities. You simply never asked. You assumed we were primitive because it suited your purposes to think so. Commander Scene touched his communications device. I'm receiving live updates from Earth Defense Command. The Valdorian fleet is being escorted out of our solar system. No damage has been done to their ships. No lives have been lost. The Valdorian ambassador looked ready to explode with rage. This is an act of war. The Valdorian Empire will not stand for this humiliation. Admiral Jorax of the Arcturians laughed, a musical sound that cut through the tension. I believe, Ambassador Krelltox, that you will find it difficult to declare war over being prevented from stealing another species' planet. Several other council members nodded in agreement. The mood in the chamber was shifting. There is more, Frank said. The screens changed again, now showing a map of council space with hundreds of small dots scattered throughout it. What are we seeing? Vextrol asked, his voice barely audible. For 3 years, Scene explained, while you ignored us and plotted against us, we've been deploying observation platforms throughout council space. They're completely passive, no weapons, just sensors. But they've been monitoring fleet movements, resource exploitation, and treaty violations by various council members. The dots on the screen began to pulse with different colors, each representing a different type of activity. The red dots, Scene continued, show locations where council members have violated the non-interference treaty with pre-spaceflight civilizations. The blue dots show illegal resource extraction. The green dots show military buildups in supposedly demilitarized zones. Council members looked at each other in shock and suspicion. Many of them had been caught breaking rules they thought no one would discover. But most importantly, Frank said, his voice gentle but firm, notice the yellow dots. Yellow dots appeared around the council station itself and around each major council homeworld. These represent human stealth platforms with defensive capabilities similar to those protecting our solar system. We never wanted to use them. We still don't, but they exist, and they can be activated if needed. The chamber fell completely silent. Even Vextrol seemed at a loss for words. Humanity came to this council seeking friendship and cooperation. Frank said, breaking the silence, we still want those things, but we will no longer pretend to be less than we are in order to make others comfortable. We will no longer accept second-class status or threats to our sovereignty. Frank walked back to the central platform and looked out at the stunned faces of the council members. Now, he said calmly, let's discuss the terms of humanity's full membership in this council. For almost an hour after Frank's declaration, the council chamber remained in chaos. Species that had been enemies for centuries now accused each other of various violations shown on the human sensor data. Others demanded emergency sessions to discuss the human revelations. A few simply left the chamber, presumably to contact their homeworlds for instructions. Vextrol finally managed to restore order by declaring a short recess. As council members filed out of the chamber, many glanced at the human delegation with new expressions, some fearful, others respectful, and a few even admiring. Frank, Olivia, Scene, and Diane remained at their seats, reviewing data and preparing for what would come next. They're scared, Diane observed quietly. Fear isn't what we want, Frank replied. Respect is. Admiral Jorax approached their section. The tall, slender Arcturian moved with fluid grace. Ambassador Pearson, I must say this has been the most interesting council session in my 200 years of service, Jorax said. Frank smiled. I hope it's also productive, Admiral. I believe it will be. Several delegations are already discussing supporting your bid for full membership, including mine. Thank you, Admiral. May I ask why the Arcturians seem less surprised than others by our revelations? Jorax made a gesture that seemed equivalent to a human shrug. Perhaps because we bothered to study your history. Any species that survived its own atomic age without extinction must have remarkable adaptability and caution. We suspected you were holding back. After the recess, the council reconvened. Vextrol looked noticeably less confident as he called the session to order. The council will now address the situation regarding Earth's status, Vextrol announced. Ambassador Pearson has requested full membership for humanity. Under the circumstances, this request deserves immediate consideration. Frank returned to the central platform. Thank you, High Counselor. Humanity proposes the following terms for our integration into the Council. The screens displayed a simple list. First, Earth and all planets in the Sol system are recognized as sovereign human territory. Second, humanity receives full voting rights on all Council matters. Third, a formal apology from the Valdorian Empire for their attempted colonization of Mars. Kreltox, still present but subdued, hissed softly. Fourth, Frank continued, humanity will share certain technological advances with the Council in exchange for equal access to Council scientific databases. And fifth, all species that have been planning resource exploitation in our system will formally renounce those plans. Various Council members began consulting with their aides and with each other. Some seemed ready to agree immediately, while others appeared hesitant. A representative of the Morrigan Collective rose. And if we refuse these terms? Frank's expression remained calm. Then humanity will withdraw from the Council and activate our defensive network. We would prefer friendship, but we will accept isolation if necessary. The implied threat hung in the air. I move to accept the human terms, Admiral Jorax said, breaking the tense silence. The Grixian Dominion Seconds, called another voice. To everyone's surprise, it came from a species that had previously shown little interest in humans. The representative from the Morrigan Collective stood again. This is coercion. The humans are threatening us with their hidden weapons. No, Frank said firmly. We are offering you a choice between treating us as equals or not dealing with us at all. That's not a threat. It's diplomacy. Vextrol consulted briefly with other senior council members before speaking. This matter is too important for an immediate vote. The council will take 2 standard weeks to consider the human terms. In the meantime, the Valdorian action against Mars is officially suspended. Frank nodded. That is acceptable. However, I must emphasize that our defensive measures will remain active during this period. As the session ended, various representatives approached Frank, some offering support, others seeking private assurances. A few even apologized for past dismissals. Well, Scene said quietly as they observed the changing attitudes around them. It seems the Council is finally taking humanity seriously. Yes, Frank replied. Amazing what happens when courtesy becomes a choice rather than a necessity. 2 weeks passed quickly. The Council station buzzed with activity as species that had ignored humans now sought meetings with Frank and his team. Trade representatives offered partnerships. Military officials requested information about human stealth technology. Scientists proposed joint research projects. Frank handled it all with the same calm demeanor he had always shown, but now without the forced smile and excessive politeness. He was simply himself, direct, fair, and focused on humanity's interests. On the final day of deliberation, the Council chamber was filled to capacity. Even species that rarely attended sessions had sent representatives to witness the vote on humanity's status. Frank sat with his team, reviewing last-minute data. No matter what happens today, he told them, you've all served Earth with distinction. Vextrol called the session to order. The Zentari High Counselor looked different today, more cautious, less dismissive. The Council will now vote on the petition for humanity to receive full membership with the terms proposed by Ambassador Pearson, Vextrol announced. The voting process was simple. Each member's screen would show either approval or rejection. The results would be displayed on the main chamber screen for all to see. Voting begins now, Vextrol declared. The chamber fell silent as council members made their choices. Frank watched calmly, his expression revealing nothing. After 5 minutes, Vextrol spoke again. Voting is now closed. The results will be displayed. The main screen lit up with the final tally. 25 approvals, 1 rejection, and 1 abstention. A murmur of surprise spread through the chamber. Even Frank seemed momentarily taken aback by the overwhelming support. The council has spoken, Vextrol announced. Earth is granted full membership with all rights and responsibilities therein. The terms proposed by Ambassador Pearson are accepted in full. Frank stood and bowed slightly to the council. Humanity thanks you for this decision. We look forward to working together as equals. The formal session ended, but most council members remained in the chamber, forming small groups for discussion. Frank was approached by Vextrol himself. Ambassador Pearson, the Zentari said, his voice lower than usual, might I have a private word? Frank nodded and followed Vextrol to a small side chamber. Once alone, the High Counselor seemed to deflate slightly, his formal posture relaxing. I have a question that has been troubling me, Vextrol said. Why did humanity maintain the facade of excessive politeness for so long? You clearly had the power to demand respect from the beginning. Frank considered his answer carefully. High Counselor, humans have a saying, speak softly and carry a big stick. It means that true strength doesn't need to announce itself constantly. But the disrespect you endured was difficult, Frank admitted. But humanity genuinely wanted peaceful integration. We preferred to earn respect through patience and diplomacy, rather than through shows of force. And yet in the end, it was force that gained you respect, Vextrol observed. Frank shook his head. No, it was truth. We simply stopped pretending to be less than we are. Vextrol was silent for a moment. I believe I have misjudged your species, Ambassador. That's understandable, Frank replied. We've misjudged each other, but now we have a chance to start again with honesty between us. As they returned to the main chamber, Frank saw his team speaking with various council members. Olivia was deep in discussion with a group of scientists. Sean was comparing notes with military officers from 3 different species. Diane was organizing new communication protocols with other diplomatic staff. You know, Frank said to Vextrol, humanity still values courtesy. It was never our weakness. It was a choice we extended to those we hoped would become friends. And now? Vextrol asked. Frank smiled, a genuine smile without the diplomatic polish. Now we can be courteous because we want to be, not because we have to be. That's the difference. As they rejoined the gathering, Frank felt a sense of satisfaction. Humanity had finally found its true place in the galaxy, not through endless accommodation, but through the strength to be authentically themselves.